Chapter 3: Young Girl at the Lake. As he struggled to get into the Nirjor family, Shailesh was surprised by this unexpected kindness. Mr. Manish and his wife invited him into their house and treated him to a hearty meal. Constantly apologizing for the rudeness in the past, they emphasized that his presence was a blessing for many generations of their family. Shailesh nodded like pounding rice. Although Shailesh had lowered his honor many times, it seemed that he had smoothly entered the prestigious Nirjor family. While they were chatting happily, Shailesh saw a maid carrying a tray of food. Entering the spacious row of houses to the right of the main house. Suddenly, he thought of the pale mistress who had cruelly sent him back last time. He forced his mouth to ask Mr. Manish if the rest of the family didn't eat together. Mr. Manish replied that his son, Atul, has been studying abroad for a year now. As for Anu, his daughter, her health is not very good. So, if it's not a special occasion, she'll eat in her room. Normally, she rarely goes out. Glancing at Mrs. No's indifferent expression when she heard about Anu, Shailesh nodded and visualized the problem. Because the house has too much in, it makes people sick all year round, and it also causes discord in the family, and they naturally hate each other without doing anything. After the meal was over, Manish led him to a row of houses reserved for guests. Anu's residence can be seen from here, but the window is always closed. Light cannot enter. Whatever happened inside, no one knows. The two sat and chatted, not understanding how to push the story. Mr. Manish said that this month, next month, in this house, there are 3 grandsons' weddings in turn. Shailesh frowned, wondering how deeply those people were in love, yet still dared to marry into the family line, where one person dies every month. He couldn't think of it, so he asked Mr. Manish if their family was like this. But still thinking about getting married. Mr. Manish said that because his wife went to see fortune-telling last time. The fortune-teller said that Mr. Manish's family had a great disaster, so he held a great festival, hoping to change his luck. Still knowing the possibility is not high. But Mr. Manish's family still wants to, while there's life, there's hope. Shailesh asked hesitantly, will the bride agree? But Mr. Manish didn't answer. Shailesh sighed, the Nirjor family is so rich, they can't do anything they want. He still knows that their family is sick, so they have to ask everywhere for help. But despite this, if it doesn't work, aren't there 3 more people living in fear? The atmosphere suddenly became awkward, so Mr. Manish quickly ended the conversation and left. Shailesh started unloading luggage, clothes in the closet, and some personal items into the toilet. Finally, a wooden box with strange patterns, reminiscent of many mysterious symbols from ancient times. Shailesh carefully lifted it with both hands and placed it at the head of the bed. Gently stroked every detail on the box, muttering incessantly. Success or failure depends on this item. Shailesh sat reading for a while, then stood up and walked around to ease digestion. As soon as he stepped out into the front yard, he immediately saw Anu, sitting with her back to him, looking at the space in the middle of the lake. Today is a windless day. The water's surface is calm and still, imprinted with the bright moonlight. Didn't think amid such a dark, ghostly place, there was still such a beautiful and poetic scene. Looking at her so attentively, Shailesh was also unable to speak, just standing next to her, occasionally glancing at her. The last time he was so impressed with her unusually pale skin, he hadn't had time to look at her. Now that he looked closely, Anu had pink lips, a high nose bridge, and big round, double eyelids, typical of a delicate face. The more he looked at it, the more sympathetic he felt. Naturally, he thought that this beautiful girl was born sick, always living in fear. Shailesh could not hide his sympathy. Suddenly, Anu turned around and asked Shailesh if he heard the cry. Shailesh was startled awake, frantically shaking his head to indicate that he had not. Anu frowned, looked seriously at Shailesh, and confirmed that she had heard the cry coming from nearby very clearly. Her face showed doubts about Shailesh's identity as an exorcist. Seeing that, he immediately said that it was probably the sound of the wind blowing through the surrounding trees. Before he could finish speaking, Anu said that there was no wind today, confusing Shailesh and leaving him at a loss for words. Anu stared at him, finally letting out a heavy sigh. Naturally, he had the feeling that he had done something wrong to her. Anu looked away and said that he was young. Don't get caught up in this. She advised him it was best to move out tonight. She deliberately emphasized the two words tonight. Shailesh knew Anu was referring to the exorcist who had died on the first night here. Shailesh didn't agree to leave. He thought that his job was to catch ghosts. So how could he leave her haunted house? Anu tilted her head defiantly. She assumed he didn't even know where the ghost was standing in order to catch it. Then, she turned and left. Shailesh felt a little frustrated, because his pride had been touched. He pulled out his wallet and took out a yellow talisman, with the words Nom written on it in red, then chased after Anu. Shailesh gave the talisman and told her to bring it, then the devil would not do anything to her. Anu held the talisman and looked at the characters on it. Under the pale moonlight, they seemed to be moving. Her hand trembled, almost dropping it. Seeing that, Shailesh quickly reassured her that he had already done the magic. The charm was very powerful. Keep it carefully. She pursed her lips, folded the talisman, clasped it in her palm, and quickly turned her back and walked away. It was almost 10 o'clock in the evening. Somewhere a dog was barking persistently. It is often said that a dog barking incessantly at night is a sign of a visiting ghost. Shailesh watched Anu enter the room and close the door. He pondered for a while before returning to his old place, when he suddenly discovered a girl combing her hair not far away. That comb was made of ivory, and the motifs on it were intricately carved. That thin hand used a comb to slowly brush each line. Her hair was jet black. It was more mysteriously beautiful in the moonlight. A few strands of hair fluttered and winded, as if a whole soul resided in it. The hair was so beautiful, Shailesh secretly praised it in his heart. Suddenly, the sound of a dog howling from nowhere startled him, and he unconsciously looked back. In a quiet, dark area, the trees were motionless, and not even the cries of insects could be heard. Suddenly, a scary thought appeared in Shailesh's mind. Obviously, there was no wind this night. Why was the other girl's hair fluttering? Immediately, he turned his head. However, the girl had completely disappeared, as if she had never been here. Only the ivory comb was left lying on the ground. He picked it up, studied it for a while, then decided to bring it back. He thought that he would find its owner tomorrow, as the girl certainly had a problem. Returning to the room, Shailesh found that his body smelled of sweat, so he immediately entered the bathroom and washed the dust all day. After he opened the faucet, the steam rose and blurred the mirror, covering him. Gently closing his eyes, he enjoyed the feeling of each splash of water patting his face. He hummed a song as he washed his hair. Suddenly, He opened his eyes wide, staring straight ahead. His arm froze as if frozen. Shailesh could feel the entanglement. His fingers seemed to be stuck in a long, smooth, and sticky hair. His wrist suddenly ached, as if something was squeezing it. He frantically reached forward to feel what it was, but the feeling was completely empty. Haven't calmed down yet. Shailesh knelt down, as if there was a big rock on his shoulder. He had to grip the sink to stay upright. At the same time, he realized the hot water from the shower turned cold. Not the kind of cool water for a summer bath, but very cold. That cold was like a knife piercing his skin, making it difficult for him to breathe. As the temperature changed drastically, the water vapor clinging to the mirror was evaporated, leaving the image in the mirror clear. A wave of panic spread through Shailesh's body, making his limbs weak. From the mirror, he saw a head sprouting from his shoulder. Its face was covered with blood. It had no eyes, but two dark sockets instead, and its mouth was incessant. Shailesh stammered, unable to utter a word. The head suddenly smiled sinisterly, the corners of its mouth turning up, higher, up to its ears. Laughter echoed throughout the bathroom. Shailesh looked down at his shoulder. Absolutely nothing. He gritted his teeth, hurriedly grabbed the doorknob, and turned it around. He wanted to jump out. However, the door remained motionless, as if it had been locked from the outside. At this moment, the doorknob was as soft as dough. Shailesh panicked and withdrew his hand. He couldn't believe what was in front of him. The doorknob had turned into an eyeball. The red veins were visible in the whites of the eyes, and its gaze was extremely angry and full of hatred. Shailesh screamed, quickly withdrew his hand, and fell to the ground. It wasn't that he had slipped, but a long hair that was dragging him down, wrapping around his neck, squeezing. Opening his mouth to take a sip of air, he tried to crawl out the door. Only the box could save him. That hair tightened even more than at first. Shailesh was in severe pain. However, in the dying moment, the survival instinct rose more than ever. Shailesh began to recite an incantation, punching the ground repeatedly, and splashing water. It really worked. The doorknob returned to normal. The long hair that had been tightened around his neck was loosened. Shailesh stood up, hurriedly rushed out, opened the wooden box, took out a bell, and rang it continuously, reading the mantra non-stop. From the bathroom came a rumbling sound like someone punching the wall. The sound of objects falling, faucets pouring. Then all the sounds got smaller and smaller, until they stopped altogether. Everything fell into complete silence. Shailesh put his hand on his chest, gasping for breath. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. A maid called in and asked if Master Shailesh was asleep. He jumped, but quickly regained his composure, asking what was wrong with finding him so late at night. The maid honestly replied that she was on patrol according to her schedule. Hearing the noise, she went to ask if Shailesh was all right. Since the frequency of ghost stories had increased, Mr. Manish ordered people to work every night to take turns holding a lamp to check around the house of the patriarch, the rest of the houses, and around the village. Seeing anything unusual, they were to immediately call out, so that everyone in the family could come to help in time. Although knowing that the situation could not be improved, every night, the maids still carried flashlights around the buildings. Shailesh said out loud that it was nothing. Hearing that, the maid also felt more secure. She said if Shailesh needed anything, he should just call her. Then, she walked away. Shailesh wiped the sweat from his forehead. He suddenly remembered something and quickly got dressed, opened the door, and called for the maid to come back. He sent back the ivory comb and instructed the maid to find the owner of this comb the next morning and return it. The maid looked at him with a puzzled expression. Ivory combs are expensive. If people just work for other people like maids, where could they get such expensive items? Only Mrs. Anil and Miss Anil have it. Shailesh scratched his head, but that figure was not of Mrs. Anil. But he saw Anil entering the room. So who is it? The more he thought about it, the more he couldn't come up with an answer. He returned to the room and opened the drawer, intending to show the comb to the maid to see. But he couldn't find it, as if it never existed.